The snow fell like it had a grudge against Manhattan that Christmas Eve. Thick, wet flakes that stuck to Imani Beaumont's eyelashes and refused to melt. She stood on the loading dock behind Voss Financial Holdings at 11:47 p.m., still wearing her navy blazer, still holding the cardboard box that contained 11 years of her career, a framed photograph of her mother, a half-empty bottle of hand lotion, the mug her niece Zuri had painted at summer camp that said, "World's okayest auntie" in wobbly purple letters. Her security badge lay at the bottom of the box, snapped clean in half. The wind cut through her blazer like it wasn't there. She hadn't been given time to grab her coat. Marcus Voss, the man she had covered for through 3 federal audits, 2 divorces, and 1 very quiet inpatient stint at a Connecticut wellness facility, had walked into the conference room at 10:52 p.m. with 2 men from HR and told her that her position was being eliminated effective immediately. No severance, no 2 weeks. A signed non-disclosure agreement had been slid across the mahogany table like a dinner check. "You understand why this has to be handled discreetly," he had said, adjusting his cufflinks. Diamond ones. She had bought them for him last Christmas from her own bonus because his wife had forgotten again. She understood, all right. She understood that 6 days ago she had walked into his office to report a $2.3 million discrepancy in the Yeun-Cho acquisition ledger. She understood that yesterday morning she had asked, in an email she was certain he would delete but couldn't, whether the discrepancy had been intentional. She understood that discretion, in Marcus's vocabulary, meant burial. Imani set the box down on the wet concrete because her arms were shaking too badly to hold it. She was 34 years old. She had $847 in her checking account, $12,000 in credit card debt she had accumulated helping her sister Vanessa move out of an abusive marriage, and a rent check due on the 28th that was going to bounce like a basketball. And she had told her mama, only that morning, that this year they were finally going to have a real Christmas. Ham with the pineapple rings, the good tree, presents that came in actual boxes instead of gift bags reused from last year. She wasn't going to cry. She had decided this on the elevator ride down. She wasn't going to give the security cameras that satisfaction. But her body wasn't asking her permission, and the first hot tear rolled down her cheek and mixed with the snow, and she made a sound she didn't recognize, a small broken sound like something inside her had finally cracked all the way through. That was when the black car pulled up. Not a taxi, not a rideshare. A matte black Bentley flying spur, silent as a held breath, its rear window sliding down with a whisper that shouldn't have been audible over the wind. The man inside was maybe 40, sharp jawline, a camel wool coat that probably cost more than her last 3 paychecks combined, dark eyes that looked at her the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, seeing something underneath. "Ms. Beaumont," he said. His voice was quiet, and specifically hers, like he had said her name 100 times in private before this moment. "I've been waiting to speak with you for 6 days. Please, get in the car." She should have run. Every instinct her mama had drilled into her since she was 7 years old was screaming at her to run. Instead, she looked back at the loading dock, at the box, at the 11 years of a life she wasn't going to be allowed to grieve, and she asked the only question that mattered. "Who are you?" He smiled without smiling. "Someone who read your email." But to understand how Imani ended up standing in the snow on Christmas Eve making a decision that would rewrite every rule she had ever lived by, we need to go back. If you've ever poured yourself into a job that ate you alive and then spit you out the second you dared to speak up, this story is for you. If you've ever been the one who held everything together, the reliable one, the one who never called in sick, the one who trained the man who eventually got promoted over you, this story is for you. If you've ever wondered whether the good you do in silence will ever come back around, whether the receipts you kept in case matter, whether being the smartest person in the room while being invisible is a survival strategy or just a longer way to disappear, then pull up a chair. Because what happened to Imani Beaumont in the 72 hours after she got fired on Christmas Eve is going to make you rethink every quiet loyalty you've ever paid into. Before we go any further, do me a favor. If you believe that being underestimated is a weapon nobody sees you loading, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we tell stories about women who load quietly and fire once. Drop a comment right now and tell me the city you're watching from. And tell me one word that describes the last time somebody in power made you feel small. Just one word. I'll be reading them. Here's the question I want you sitting with the whole way through. What does a woman owe the people who built their comfort on her exhaustion? Because Imani was about to find out that the answer is nothing, and that nothing, delivered correctly, can be the most expensive thing in the room. Imani Beaumont grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, above a Haitian bakery that filled her childhood with the smell of butter and cardamom. Her mother, Corinne, worked as a dialysis nurse at Kings County Hospital, 12-hour shifts, 3 days on, 1 day off, for 29 years. Her father had left when Imani was 4 and Vanessa was 2, and Corinne had never spoken his name again, not once, not even when the child support checks stopped coming and she started taking the overnight shifts to make rent. Imani learned early that being useful was how you earned the right to be loved. She learned it from watching her mama come home at 7 in the morning, with her scrubs smelling like bleach and other people's blood, drop her purse on the kitchen counter, and immediately start braiding Vanessa's hair for school. She learned it when she was 9 and made her first pot of grits without supervision, and Corinne cried and said, "Baby, you are my whole heart." She learned that love was labor, and labor was the only currency she was ever going to have. She went to Brooklyn Tech on scholarship. She went to Fordham on scholarship. She graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting and a job offer from Voss Financial Holdings, a mid-sized private equity firm on the 42nd floor of a building on Park Avenue. And the day she got hired, she stood in the lobby and looked up at the ceiling and thought, "I made it, Mama. I actually made it." That was 2013. She was 23. Marcus Voss was 39, blonde and tanned in a way that never seemed connected to actual sunlight, and he took her under his wing in a way that felt, at the time, like being chosen. "You have the sharpest eyes I've ever seen on someone your age," he told her 3 months in, when she caught a rounding error that would have cost the firm $180,000. "I'm going to teach you everything I know." He did teach her. He taught her how to read the room. He taught her which partners took their coffee with 2 sugars and which ones wanted to be handed the cup without eye contact. He taught her how to draft memos in his voice so seamlessly that eventually she was writing them alone, and he was signing them without reading. He taught her that the firm had a culture, and the culture was that the men made the deals and the women made the men look good, and if she wanted to eat at the table, she needed to earn her seat by serving everybody else first. She served. Lord, did she serve. She missed her cousin Terrence's funeral because Marcus needed her to fly to Zurich for a due diligence meeting. She missed Vanessa's college graduation because a client was in town and Marcus wanted her at the dinner to add some color to the room, a phrase she pretended not to hear because pretending was cheaper than fighting. She spent Christmas Day 2019 at Marcus's Greenwich estate helping his second wife Bethany arrange the caterer's mistakes into a presentable buffet because Bethany was crying in the powder room and Marcus had texted Imani directly and said, "Fix this, please, you're the only one who can." She fixed it. She always fixed it. And every March, when bonuses came out, she got a solid, respectable number that was always, always, always about $40,000 less than the white men who had joined the firm 3 years after her. She told herself the story that women like her tell themselves. The next promotion, the next quarter, the next time. If she was just a little more indispensable, a little more patient, a little more the kind of woman who didn't complain, the door would open. That was the lie. That was the whole lie, and she paid its rent for 11 years without ever asking to see the deed. Her mama got diagnosed with congestive heart failure in the spring of 2023, stage 2. Manageable, the cardiologist said. If Corinne could reduce stress, reduce hours, reduce salt, reduce the accumulated weight of raising 2 daughters alone on a nurse's salary in a city that had spent 30 years trying to price her out, Imani started sending her mama $1,800 a month. She started sending Vanessa another $600 because Vanessa's ex was behind on child support and Zuri needed braces. She started eating instant ramen at her desk and telling her friends she was doing a cleanse when they invited her to dinners she couldn't afford, She took on more work. She stayed later. She became, in the 22 months between her mama's diagnosis and the night she got fired, the highest-performing associate director at Voss Financial Holdings, and also the most invisible. Then came the Yeun-Cho acquisition. It was a Korean logistics conglomerate, family-owned, being sold in a leveraged buyout that Marcus had personally structured. Imani was assigned to reconcile the transitional ledgers, standard work, boring work, the kind of work she could do in her sleep, except the numbers didn't work. $2.3 million was flowing out of an escrow account and into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, whose sole listed officer was a name she didn't recognize. The transactions were spaced 12 days apart. They had been going on for 4 months, and every single one had been personally authorized, via a scanned signature that she recognized because she had been forging that signature on his approval, at his request, for 6 years. Marcus Voss was stealing from his own client, and her name, her forged signature, was all over it. She sat at her desk on the evening of December 18th and stared at the screen until the numbers went soft, and she understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that she was standing on a trap door. The only question was who was going to be the one to pull the lever. She should have quit right then. She should have walked out with copies of everything and hired a lawyer and never looked back. But she was 34 and she was tired, and she still, God help her, believed that if she just told Marcus what she had found, he would explain it, and it would make sense, and the world would go back to being the world. She sent the email at 6:14 a.m. on December 23rd. At 10:52 p.m. on December 24th, she was fired. At 11:47 p.m. on December 24th, a black Bentley pulled up to the loading dock, and a stranger who knew her name told her he had been reading her email for 6 days. She got in the car. She didn't decide to. Her body decided for her, the way bodies sometimes do when they have already calculated the math of standing in wet snow with no coat versus the math of getting into a warm car with a stranger, and have concluded that the wet snow is the certain danger, and the stranger is only a probable one. She slid onto cream leather seats that smelled like cedar, and something more expensive, something she couldn't name. The door closed with the specific soft thud of a car that was built to survive things. The man handed her a cashmere throw the color of oatmeal. She took it because her hands were shaking and pretending otherwise was going to cost more than pride was worth right now. "My name is Dohyun Seo," he said. "I'm the president and majority stakeholder of the Yeun-Cho Group. You've been auditing my family's acquisition." The bottom of Imani's stomach dropped out of her body and kept falling. She had never met him. She had seen his name on documents. She had read his correspondence with Marcus, professional and clipped and always in perfect English, and she had built a picture of him in her head that had been entirely wrong. She had imagined a much older man. She had imagined someone who looked like the grandfather in a diaspora film, quiet and dignified and slow. Dohyun Seo was none of those things. He was maybe 42. His hair was cut close on the sides and slightly longer on top, threaded with the first suggestions of gray at the temples. He had a small scar that split his left eyebrow. He was watching her with the kind of stillness that predators use. "How did you get my email?" she asked. Her voice sounded like someone else's. "That was on our internal system. It was forwarded to me," he said, "by someone inside your firm who has been waiting for a very long time, for exactly one person to be brave enough to send something like that. She saw the email in Marcus's inbox before he had a chance to delete it. She sent it to a private address I gave her 4 months ago." "Who?" Dohyun Seo smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had just watched a chess piece move into exactly the square he had needed it to. "Bethany Voss." Imani made a sound. She didn't know what kind of sound it was. Somewhere between a laugh and the last air leaving a punctured tire. Bethany. Bethany, whose caterer she had rescued. Bethany, who had cried in a powder room in 2019, and hugged her afterward and said, "You are the only real person in this whole house." Bethany, who Imani had assumed was a decorative wife, because Imani had let herself, like everyone else, be trained to assume that beautiful women with pale hair and no visible job weren't paying attention. "Bethany," Imani repeated. Bethany Voss knew. Bethany Voss has been building a case against her husband for 2.5 years, Dohyun said. She hired investigators. She wore a wire to 3 dinners. She kept a copy of every document she could get her hands on. But she needed someone on the inside of the firm to confirm the numbers. Someone with the technical vocabulary to make a federal prosecutor understand what they were looking at. She had been watching you. She told me 6 months ago that when the moment came, you would be the one who saw it first. Why didn't she just tell me? Because she wasn't sure you would believe her, and because she needed you to find it on your own. A whistleblower who is recruited is a witness. A whistleblower who arrives on her own conscience is a hero. There is a difference in a courtroom. There is a difference in a settlement. Imani stared at him. The Bentley was moving now, gliding down Park Avenue like it wasn't touching the ground, and she had no memory of it starting. "You're not just an acquisition target," she said slowly. "You knew Marcus was stealing from you. You let him." "I let him keep going long enough to build a case that would end him permanently, instead of just embarrassing him," Dohyun corrected. His voice was gentle. That was the part that scared her most. "Marcus Voss has been laundering money for a number of people over the last decade, some of whom my family has been trying to remove from certain markets for a very long time. The Cayman Shell Company isn't his. He is a middleman who thinks he is a mastermind. When he goes down, he takes an entire network with him." "And me?" Imani said. "My signature is on those authorizations. Marcus made sure of that. If he goes down, I go with him." "That," Dohyun said, "is why I've been waiting 6 days to speak with you." The car turned east. She didn't recognize the street. She didn't recognize her own hands folded in the cashmere on her lap. The city outside the window had become another city, one she was seeing for the first time. "Ms. Beaumont," he said, "I would like to offer you a job." She almost laughed. It came up her throat like bile and she swallowed it back down. "I just got fired," she said. "For being the only person in that building who tried to do the right thing, and you want to offer me a job." "I want to offer you a very specific job," Dohyun said. "The Yeun-Cho Group is opening a North American headquarters in Manhattan next quarter. We need a director of forensic compliance, someone who understands how American private equity hides money, because we intend to make sure that no one hides money from us again. The salary is $340,000 plus equity in the North American division. The signing bonus is $75,000. It would be effective January 2nd. Imani couldn't breathe. $340,000. That was more than 4 times what she had been making. That was her mama's mortgage paid off in 18 months. That was Zuri's braces and Vanessa's community college tuition, and a real Christmas tree every year for the rest of Corinne's life. And it was too good. It was too clean. It was the shape of a trap she had spent 11 years learning to recognize. "What's the catch?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said the thing that changed everything. "Ms. Beaumont, before I answer that, there is something I need you to understand about my family, about who I am." He paused. He was choosing his words in real time, and she could see him doing it. The small tightening at the corner of his mouth that a man makes when he is deciding how much truth to give a person who might not survive it. "The Yeun-Cho Group is a legitimate company. Our shipping operations, our logistics, our real estate holdings are all clean, audited, publicly documented. But my family, on my father's side, has historical relationships, old relationships, in Korea, in parts of the Korean-American community, relationships that predate the corporate structure, and that the corporate structure was built, in part, to move away from." She understood before he finished the sentence. She had grown up in Brooklyn. She knew what old relationships meant. She knew what it meant when a man in a $4,000 coat used the word historical, like it was a fence he was still trying to climb over. "Your family is Jopok," she said quietly. She knew the word because she had once dated a Korean-American law student in college who had explained, over pancakes at 3 a.m, why he could never introduce her to his uncles. Dohyun didn't flinch. "My grandfather was. My father spent his entire life converting the organization's assets into legal enterprises. I was educated at Wharton. I have never personally participated in anything illegal. But the name Seo carries weight in certain rooms, and I will not lie to you about that weight. Marcus Voss did not know who he was stealing from. He thought he was stealing from a Korean shipping family. He was not. And when he finds out? He is finding out tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., when federal agents arrive at his home in Greenwich, with a warrant that Bethany's attorneys and my attorneys have spent 4 months constructing together. He will spend the rest of his life in a federal facility, if he is lucky. If he is unlucky, some of the people he was laundering for will reach him first. The car was quiet. She could hear her own pulse in her ears. "You want me to work for a man whose family has ties to organized crime," she said. "I want you to work for a legitimate corporation with a difficult surname," Dohyun said. "There is a difference. It is a difference I have spent my adult life defending. But you deserve to know before you sign anything, because I do not want to be another Marcus in your life. I do not want to be a man who withholds the truth until it is convenient for me to release it." He turned in his seat to face her fully. "Ms. Beaumont, your name is on those forged authorizations. Marcus's attorneys, the moment they realize he is going down, will try to feed you to the prosecutors as the responsible party. Bethany's team has affidavits from 3 former assistants, confirming that Marcus routinely instructed staff to sign his name on documents, which will protect you. But you will be dragged through hearings, your name will be in the press, and you will need legal representation you cannot afford." He paused. "Or," he said, "you can accept a position at a company whose legal team is already retained, already briefed on your situation, and already prepared to defend you as a valued employee and a cooperating witness. You can be a woman standing behind a corporate legal shield instead of a woman standing alone in the snow." He didn't smile when he said it. He didn't try to sell it. He laid it out like a chessboard and let her see all the pieces. "You knew," she said. "You knew Marcus was going to fire me. That's why you were parked at the loading dock at midnight on Christmas Eve." "I knew," he said, "that a man like Marcus doesn't survive the email you sent him. I knew he would move fast. I hoped he would move stupidly. He did both." Imani looked out the window. They were somewhere near the East River now. The Bentley had slowed. She could see the water, black and full of broken lights. She thought about her mama. She thought about the box of her life sitting on a loading dock in the snow. She thought about the 11 years she had spent making a man rich, who had planned from the very beginning to make her disposable. "I want to see the contract," she said, "in writing, tonight, and I want my own attorney to review it before I sign anything." Dohyun Seo smiled. This time it reached his eyes. "I was hoping you would say that." They didn't drive to his office. They drove to a private residence in Sutton Place, a townhouse with a discreet brass number on the door, and a woman in her 60s waiting in the foyer with hot ginger tea, and a robe and a change of dry clothes in Imani's exact size, which was information Imani filed away for later examination. The woman's name was Mrs. Han. She had been Dohyun's father's executive assistant for 31 years, and now ran the household with the quiet ruthlessness of someone who had seen 3 generations of men make and unmake themselves. She led Imani to a guest bathroom, handed her a cup of tea, and said, "Take your time. The lawyers will be here in 40 minutes. Imani took a shower. She hadn't planned to. But the water was hot, and the soap smelled like green tea, and her body was making decisions again. And by the time she came out in the borrowed cashmere sweater and dark jeans, she felt, for the first time in 6 days, like a person who had a body at all. The attorney was a black woman named Adaeze Okwosa. She was maybe 50. Her braids were pulled into a low bun, and she was wearing pearl earrings and a Christmas Eve expression that said, "I was at my grandbaby's pageant 2 hours ago, and I still made it here before you did. So let's get to it." She had a folder. Inside the folder was the contract Dohyun had described, and also a separate document titled Retainer Agreement. "I'm not with the SEO family," Adaeze said. "I'm an independent attorney. Mr. Seo pays my firm a general retainer for consultations, but he has agreed, in writing, that anyone he refers to me becomes my client, not his. That means my job right now is you, not him. Do you understand? Imani nodded slowly. Good. Then let me tell you what I'm looking at, and let me tell you what I don't like, and let me tell you what you need to negotiate for before you sign. They spent 2 hours at that kitchen table. Adeze went through the contract line by line. She flagged 3 clauses that were standard, but heavier than they needed to be. She pointed out that the equity vesting schedule was aggressive in a way that favored Imani, but could also be used to pressure her into staying. She recommended a change to the non-compete that would let Imani leave the Yeun-Cho Group after 2 years without penalty, if the working relationship became untenable. She recommended adding language that guaranteed independent legal representation, paid by the company, for the duration of any federal proceedings involving Marcus Voss, with Imani's own choice of counsel. Dohyun agreed to every change. He didn't argue a single one. He signed the marked-up contract at 3:47 a.m. on Christmas morning, and Adeze witnessed it, and Imani signed underneath with a hand that was steadier than it had any right to be. Before she signed, though, she looked at Dohyun across the table, and she asked the question she had been holding. Why me? Really, not the case, not the numbers. Why did Bethany pick me, and why did you agree? Dohyun considered the question for a long time. Bethany told me, he said finally, that you were the only person in her husband's building who had ever asked her how she was doing and waited for a real answer. She said you did that in 2019, in a powder room. She said you handed her a tissue and you said, and I am quoting her exactly, ma'am, you don't have to be okay tonight. You just have to make it to tomorrow. She said she went home that night and she started keeping a journal, and the first entry in the journal was your name. Imani couldn't speak. I agreed, Dohyun continued, because Bethany's judgment about people has never been wrong, and because when I read your email to Marcus, the one you sent at 6 a.m. on the 23rd, I understood something about you that I have spent my whole life looking for in employees, and have almost never found. You wrote that email knowing it might end your career. You wrote it anyway. You did not write it for revenge. You did not write it for leverage. You wrote it because the numbers were wrong and you were the person who had noticed. That is a specific kind of courage. It is the only kind I trust. I want to be honest with you about something, Imani said. Her voice was quiet. I am terrified. Of your last name, of what it means, of what people are going to say when they hear I work for you. I have spent my whole life being careful. I don't know how to work for a family with a history like yours and stay careful. Then let me be honest with you in return, Dohyun said. You will not be asked to do anything that is not fully legal. You will report to me and only to me, and you will have the authority to refuse any assignment that violates your professional or personal ethics without consequence to your position. You will meet my mother next month, because she wants to meet you, and she will feed you until you cannot move, because that is how she says thank you. You will be treated as an executive of a legitimate corporation, because you will be one. And if at any point I fail to keep that promise, Adeze has my signature on a separation agreement that pays you 2 years of salary and releases you from every clause in this contract. It is in the folder. She witnessed it. It is yours. Adeze slid the folder across the table. Imani opened it. The separation agreement was real. It was already signed. It was dated tomorrow, December 25th, so that even if she signed the employment contract tonight, she could void it in the morning and walk away with $680,000 and no strings. She looked up at Dohyun Seo, and she understood, for the first time in her adult life, what it looked like when a man in power decided to make himself accountable to a woman on purpose. She signed the employment contract. She left the separation agreement in the folder. Merry Christmas, Ms. Beaumont, Dohyun said. Merry Christmas, Mr. Seo, she said. Neither of them smiled. It felt too serious for that. It felt like the beginning of a war. The federal agents arrived at Marcus Voss's Greenwich estate at 9:04 a.m. on December 26th. Imani knew because Adeze called her at 9:17. Marcus tried to slam the door on the lead agent. He was arrested on the front porch of his own home in a monogrammed bathrobe, while Bethany, sitting fully dressed in the kitchen with her lawyer beside her, drank a mug of coffee and did not look up. By noon, the story was on Bloomberg. By 3, it was on CNBC. By 6, Marcus Voss's photograph was on the front page of the New York Post, under the headline, "Hedge Fund Husband Caught Laundering from Wife's Favorite Charity," which was not technically accurate, but which sold papers. And Imani watched the news cycle unfold from a leather chair in the corner office of the Yeun-Cho Group's temporary Manhattan headquarters on the 29th floor of a building on Lexington that she had walked past 1,000 times without noticing. She was not on television. That had been part of a day's negotiation. Her name would appear in the federal filings as a cooperating witness. Her signature would appear on affidavits. But her face would not be on cable news, and her mother would not have to find out from a Chiron at Kings County Hospital that her daughter had been at the center of the biggest financial scandal on Park Avenue in a decade. Her mother found out from Imani. She drove out to Flatbush on the afternoon of December 26th. She sat at her mama's kitchen table with the plastic tablecloth she'd known since childhood, and she told her everything: the email, the Bentley, Dohyun, the contract, the salary. She left out the part about the Seo family history, because she didn't yet know how to say it without scaring the woman who had spent 30 years scared of every knock at the door. Corinne listened. She didn't interrupt. When Imani finished, her mama got up, walked to the stove, poured her daughter a cup of coffee that neither of them was going to drink, and sat back down. "Baby," Corinne said, "I have been waiting for you to figure out that you were worth more than they were paying you since you were 16 years old. If I have to trust one Korean man in a fancy coat to be the reason you finally figured it out, I will trust that man. But if he ever raises his voice at you, you tell me." "I still know how to make a phone call." Imani laughed for the first time in a week. Her mama pulled her into her chest and held her the way she used to when Imani was 9, and had made her first pot of grits, and Imani cried until her mama's blouse was wet, and neither of them said anything at all. If you are still with me, and you have ever had a moment when the person who raised you finally saw you the way you had been begging to be seen, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share this video with one woman in your life who needs to hear it, and drop a comment telling me the name of the person you're going to call after this video ends, because we don't get where we're going without the ones who taught us how to walk. The battle wasn't over. It was, in some ways, just starting. Marcus's attorneys, exactly as Dohyun had predicted, tried to pin the forged authorizations on Imani within 72 hours of his arrest. They filed a motion suggesting that a junior forensic analyst had been the actual signatory on the fraudulent transfers, and that Marcus had been unaware. It was a Hail Mary. It was also a career ender if it stuck. Adiz filed her response on January 4th. It included 17 sworn affidavits from current and former Voss financial employees, confirming that Marcus routinely instructed staff to sign his name, forensic handwriting analysis proving that the signatures on the Yeun-Cho authorizations matched a scanned template Marcus had personally uploaded to the firm's internal system in 2018, and, most devastatingly, an email chain in which Marcus explicitly instructed Imani in 2021 to handle the boilerplate, sign my name, you know the drill, sweetheart, which Bethany had preserved in a personal backup and turned over to prosecutors. The motion to pin the fraud on Imani was thrown out with prejudice on January 11th. The judge, a black woman in her 60s named Judge Adaobi Whitfield, wrote in her ruling that the attempt was a transparent effort to weaponize a subordinate's forced compliance against her, and this court will not entertain it. Imani read the ruling 3 times. She printed it out. She put it in a frame. She hung it in her new office next to the photograph of her mother. Then, on January 15th, Marcus Voss called her, from Rikers, from a payphone. Someone had passed him her direct line, because Marcus knew people who could get anyone's direct line, and he still believed that his voice on the other end of a call was going to be enough. "Imani," he said. His voice was thinner than she had ever heard it. "Imani, please, I know how this looks. I need you to understand something. I need you to come to the hearing next week and testify that you were confused about the Cayman transfers, that you saw them and misinterpreted them. That would be enough. I would owe you for the rest of my life. I would take care of you. I would— Marcus, she said. She said it quietly. She said it the way her mama used to say it, when Imani was little and had tracked mud onto the carpet. All the weight of a woman who was done explaining herself. Marcus, do you remember what you said to me in 2019 at your Christmas party when Bethany was crying and I came downstairs to help? Do you remember what you said when I walked into the kitchen? He didn't answer. You said, "Thank God the help is here." You said it in front of your business partners. You said it in front of your wife. You said it because you had decided, a long time before that night, that I was help. Not staff, not colleague, help. And I let you say it. Because I needed the job. Because I was afraid. Because I still believed at that point in my life that if I just kept my head down and my mouth shut, one day you would look up and see me. She paused. You are seeing me now, Marcus, aren't you? She hung up. She sat in her office for a long time afterward, with the phone still in her hand, and she watched the snow fall outside the 29th floor window over Lexington Avenue, and she understood that the woman who had cried on that loading dock on Christmas Eve was already, quietly, a woman she no longer knew. The federal case against Marcus Voss went to trial on April 21st. It was expected to last 6 weeks. It lasted 11 days, because on day 9, Marcus's own general counsel, a man named Preston Halberd, took the stand, and in what the Wall Street Journal would later describe as the most spectacular act of legal self-immolation of the decade, produced a personal recording in which Marcus had, over drinks at the Yale Club in 2022, described his forgery scheme in detail and named the shell company by its Cayman registration number. Halberd had recorded the conversation because Halberd, like everyone else who had ever worked for Marcus, had eventually understood that being useful to Marcus was a survival strategy with a shelf life. He had held on to the tape for 2 years, waiting for the moment when playing it would cost him less than not playing it. That moment arrived on the 9th day of a federal trial. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Marcus Voss was convicted on 27 counts, including wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 19 years in federal prison. His assets were frozen. Bethany filed for divorce on the courthouse steps and received, per the prenuptial agreement she had insisted on, and Marcus had never bothered to read, the Greenwich estate, the Aspen chalet, and a settlement large enough that she would spend the rest of her life doing exactly what she wanted, which turned out to be running a foundation for women who needed help leaving marriages that were slowly killing them. Imani testified on day 6. She wore a charcoal suit that a daze had helped her pick out. She kept her hands folded in her lap. She spoke clearly. She looked at the jury when she answered, and she looked at Marcus only once, when the prosecutor asked her to identify him for the record, and she said, "The defendant is the man in the navy suit at the defense table." And Marcus flinched the way a man flinches when he realizes, finally, that the woman he trained to be invisible has stopped being invisible on her own schedule. Outside the courthouse, after the verdict, a reporter from the Times caught her on the steps. "Miss Beaumont, do you have anything to say to Marcus Voss?" Imani thought about it. She really thought about it. There were 100 things she could have said. There were speeches she had rehearsed in the shower for 11 years, righteous and full of specific citations of specific dates and specific humiliations. She had earned every one of them. She said none of them. "I hope," she said, "that the next woman who reports a discrepancy to her boss is believed the first time. I hope that she doesn't have to be brave. I hope that being right is enough. That's what I have to say." She walked down the steps. A daze walked beside her. Dohyun, who had sat in the back of the courtroom every single day of the trial and had never once spoken to a reporter or a camera, was waiting at the bottom of the steps with the door of a black car open, and this time it wasn't the Bentley. This time it was a modest black sedan, because they had decided together, in the weeks leading up to the trial, that the visuals of a Bentley outside a federal courthouse were not the visuals of a woman who wanted her name to stand on its own. He didn't touch her. He didn't hug her. He just held the door. "How do you feel?" he asked once she was inside. "Like I want to sleep for a week," she said. And then I want to go to work." He laughed. It was the first time she had ever heard him really laugh. It was a good sound, deeper than she had expected. "Miss Beaumont," he said, "you have 3 vacation weeks in your contract. Take them. The work will still be there." "It will, in fact, be considerably more work when you get back, because I have been asked by our board to promote you to Chief Compliance Officer for the entire North American division, effective the 1st of June, with a corresponding adjustment to your compensation. But that is a conversation for a Monday. Today, you rest." Imani stared at him. "Chief Compliance Officer," she repeated. "You earned it," he said. "The board earned the pleasure of writing your title on a placard. That is the correct order of those 2 events." The car pulled away from the courthouse. She looked back once. Marcus was being led out a side door in handcuffs, and he was smaller than she remembered. Not physically, just smaller. The way men become smaller when the story they had been telling about themselves is finally, publicly, unbelievably true. Her sister Vanessa showed up at her new apartment on a Tuesday in late May. Imani had moved out of the studio in Washington Heights and into a 1-bedroom in Fort Greene with real windows and a small terrace, and she had done it without asking Dohyun for a loan or a cosigner, because she had wanted, on principle, for the first apartment of her new life to belong entirely to her. She had bought her mama a proper recliner and a new refrigerator. She had paid off Vanessa's community college tuition in full. She was still paying off her own credit card debt in careful chunks. She was in no hurry. Debt paid slowly by a free woman was a different animal than debt paid quickly by a scared one. Vanessa arrived at 7 in the evening. She was crying before she took her coat off, and Imani knew, in the specific way that sisters know, that this was not a crying about a real problem. This was the other kind, the kind that had a bill attached. "Nay, nay," Vanessa said, using the childhood name she only used when she needed something. "I'm in a bad spot. Derek is behind on child support again. Zuri needs new sneakers for track. My car needs a transmission. I know you just paid off the tuition, and I know that was a lot, but I was hoping—" "How much?" Imani said. She didn't say it coldly. She didn't say it warmly either. She said it the way a woman says it when she has decided, in advance, that she is going to hear the number before she decides anything else. 8,000, Vanessa said. "Maybe 9. I could pay you back over the year." Imani nodded slowly. She poured her sister a glass of water. She sat down across from her at the small round table by the window that looked out over the trees on Vanderbilt Avenue. "Vanessa," she said, "I love you, and I need you to hear me. I am not going to give you $9,000. Vanessa stared at her. "I am going to help Zuri directly with the sneakers, because she is my niece and she is running track, and I want to buy her the sneakers myself. I am going to pay for the transmission on your car directly to the mechanic, because you need to get to work, and I want you to get to work. But I am not going to hand you $9,000 in a lump, not because I don't trust you, because I don't trust the pattern." "What pattern?" "The pattern where I am the ATM. The pattern where any time I get a little bit ahead, the people who love me find a shape of a problem that fits exactly into what I have available. Mama did it. You did it. Terrence did it before he died. I did it to myself, honestly, by being available for it, and I am not doing it anymore." Vanessa's face changed. Imani watched it change. She had seen this face before. It was the face that came right before the accusation. "You changed," Vanessa said, quiet, mean. "Ever since you started working for that man, you act like you're better than us." "I am not better than you," Imani said. Her voice was steady. "I am different than I was. There is a difference between those 2 things, and I need you to learn it, because I am not going backward for anybody. Not for you, not for Mama, not for the ghost of Daddy, not for Marcus Voss, and not for the woman I used to be who let him do what he did. I love you. I am not your rescue. I am your sister. Those are 2 different words, and from now on, I am only one of them." Vanessa cried for a long time. Imani let her. She didn't apologize. She didn't backtrack. She just sat across from her sister at the round table, and she waited, because she had learned, in the 6 months since Christmas Eve, that the most powerful thing a woman can do in a hard conversation is refuse to fill the silence with her own retreat. Eventually, Vanessa wiped her eyes. "The sneakers cost $180, she said. Her voice was small. "The transmission is like $1,900. "I'll have Zuri's sneakers delivered on Friday," Imani said. "Tell me what mechanic and I'll call them in the morning." Vanessa nodded. She got up. She hugged her sister. It was not a warm hug. It was a hug between two women who were figuring out how to love each other differently, and Imani understood that this was the hug she was going to get for maybe the next 2 years, and that was fine. She could wait. She was going to be around a long time. At the door, Vanessa turned. "Nay, she said. "Is he good to you? The Korean man?" Imani thought about it. "He's honest with me," she said. "That's not the same as good. But it's the first time in my life a man in a position of power has been honest with me before I had to force him to be. I'm still figuring out what to do with that." Vanessa nodded. She left. Imani stood at the door of her apartment for a long time after her sister was gone. Then she walked to the window and looked down at Vanderbilt Avenue, and she thought, "I love her. I love her. And I did not give her $9,000. And the sky did not fall." On June 1st, Imani Beaumont walked into the Yeun-Cho Group's newly completed North American headquarters on the 44th floor of a building on 6th Avenue and took possession of a corner office with a nameplate that read, Imani Beaumont, Chief Compliance Officer, North America. Her salary was $520,000 base, plus a performance bonus structure that had been negotiated by Adiz, and that Imani had, without asking anyone's permission or opinion, spent an entire Saturday reviewing line by line before signing. Her equity in the North American division had matured to a point that, on paper, made her a millionaire. She was 35 years old. 6 months ago, she had been standing in the snow with a cardboard box. The board meeting on her first Monday was in a glass conference room. There were 14 people at the table. 12 of them were men. 9 of them were Korean. 2 were older black attorneys from the firm's outside counsel. 1 was Bethany Voss, who now sat on the board of the Yeun-Cho Foundation, and who had, on the morning of Imani's promotion, sent her a bouquet of white peonies with a card that read, "The Powder Room, 2019. I remembered. Imani presented her 90-day compliance roadmap. She had built it herself. It included a whistleblower protection protocol that would have caught Marcus's fraud in 90 days instead of 6 years, a mandatory quarterly ethics audit that would apply to every executive above the level of senior director, including Dohyun, and a mentorship pipeline for junior women of color in finance that she had negotiated as a non-negotiable line item in her compensation package. The board approved everything unanimously. After the meeting, one of the older Korean board members, a man named Mr. Young, who had known Dohyun's father for 40 years, came up to her at the coffee station. He was maybe 70. His English was careful and precise. "Ms. Beaumont," he said, "I want to tell you something." She waited. "When Dohyun told me he was hiring you last December, I was against it. I did not know you. I did not trust the story of the woman on the loading dock. I thought he was being sentimental. In our business, sentiment is expensive." She nodded. She didn't interrupt. "I want to tell you," Mr. Young said, "that I was wrong. In 50 years of business, I have made this mistake perhaps 4 times. I am telling you now because I am too old to pretend I was right, and because you should know that in this room, when your name is spoken, it is spoken with respect, not because Dohyun demands it, because you have earned it." He bowed slightly. She bowed back because her college roommate had been Korean American and had taught her, patiently and with much laughter, that a small bow between equals was not a submission. It was a punctuation. She went back to her office. She closed the door. She sat down at her desk and she called her mama. "Mama," she said, "I did it. I actually did it." "Baby," Corinne said. Her voice was full of the specific tired pride that a black woman who has worked 12-hour shifts for 29 years puts into 3 words when her daughter tells her something she has been waiting her entire life to hear. "Baby, I never doubted you. Not one day, not 1 hour." Imani cried at her desk for exactly 4 minutes. Then she wiped her face, opened her laptop, and started building the mentorship program, because there was a woman somewhere in Brooklyn right now who was 23 years old and starting her first job on the 42nd floor of a building on Park Avenue, and Imani was going to make sure that woman didn't have to wait 11 years. Dohyun Seo took her to dinner on a Friday in early October. It was not their first dinner. They had eaten together many times in the months since December, in his office over takeout when the compliance rollout was in its worst weeks, at his mother's apartment in Fort Lee on the Lunar New Year, at a diner near the courthouse the night before Marcus's sentencing. But this was the first dinner that felt like a dinner. He had asked her 3 days in advance. He had told her the name of the restaurant. He had, in the specific unhurried way that had begun to feel like his signature, made it possible for her to say no. She had not said no. The restaurant was a small omakase counter in the West Village with 8 seats and a chef who did not speak. Dohyun sat beside her. He wore a dark gray suit without a tie. She wore a wine-red dress she had bought for herself with her own money, without asking anyone's opinion, from a boutique on Atlantic Avenue. They talked for a long time before they talked about anything real. About her mother, who had officially retired from Kings County Hospital in August, and who was now, at 58, taking a watercolor class at the Brooklyn Museum. About his mother, who had recently declared war on the concept of email, and was now doing all her correspondence in longhand and mailing it. About Zuri, whose track team had won the borough championship, and who now called Imani twice a week to talk about a boy in her math class. Between the 4th course and the 5th, Dohyun set down his chopsticks and looked at her. "Imani," he said. It was the first time he had called her by her first name outside of her mother's kitchen, where he had eaten kimchi jjigae in July, with the specific bewildered joy of a Korean man who was being fed by a black woman who had learned the recipe from a YouTube video because her daughter's boss was Korean, and she was going to feed him properly if it killed her. "Yes," Imani said. "I want to be honest with you about something," he said. "I have been honest with you about many things over the last 10 months. This is one I have not yet said out loud." She waited. "I care about you," he said, "in a way that is not appropriate for me to act on while I am your employer. I have been aware of this for a long time. I have been careful about it. But I do not want to be a man who keeps the truth from you, because it is convenient for me to keep it. So I am telling you now, and I am telling you with no expectation. I do not need you to respond tonight. I do not need you to respond ever. I only need you to know." She looked at him for a long time. "Dohyun," she said. She had never called him that either. His name felt strange in her mouth and also completely correct. "I care about you too," she said. "I've been aware of it for a long time. I have not said it either, because I have spent my whole life being the kind of woman who confuses being needed for being loved. And I did not want to be a woman who confused being rescued for being loved. I needed to know I was standing on my own before I could stand next to anyone." He nodded. He didn't rush. "So I would like to propose something," she said. "I would like us to keep working together for another year, a full year. During that year we do not date, we do not touch. We do the work. At the end of that year, if we both still feel this way, I will resign my position at the Yeun-Cho Group, because I do not want to be a chief compliance officer who is dating the president. I will find another job. There are 3 firms that have already tried to poach me. I will let them succeed. And then, Imani said, we can find out what we are, without a title in the room, on level ground. As 2 people, and not as a boss and an employee, and not as a rescuer and a rescued woman, because I have made it out of the snow, and I am not getting back in a Bentley for anyone." Dohyun was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled. It was the real smile, the one that reached his eyes, the one she had first seen on a Christmas morning in a kitchen in Sutton Place. "Imani Beaumont," he said. "That is the most reasonable and terrifying proposal I have ever received from a woman." "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." They ate the rest of dinner. He walked her to a cab. He did not kiss her. He did not touch her hand. He held the door of the cab open, the way he had held every door for her since the first one on Christmas Eve, and she got in, and the cab pulled away, and she looked back once, and he was still standing on the curb, and he raised one hand. She raised hers back. A year is a long time. A year is also, when you are a woman who has finally figured out what her time is worth, exactly the right length of time to build something that will last. Imani Beaumont did resign. She resigned on October 3rd of the following year, and she took a position as founding partner of a forensic compliance firm in downtown Brooklyn that she started with Adizi Okwuosa, and their first 3 clients were women who had been fired for reporting fraud at their own firms, and their 4th client was the Yeun-Cho Group, on retainer at arm's length, with a conflict of interest wall as thick as a bank vault. She and Dohyun had their first real date on October 5th. He picked her up in a taxi, not a Bentley, and he took her to a diner in Sunset Park, and they ate pancakes at 11 o'clock at night, and they talked for 4 hours about nothing important, and it was, she would tell her mother later, the first meal of her entire adult life that she had eaten without calculating what it was going to cost her later. Her mother is still taking the watercolor class. Zuri got into Brooklyn Tech on scholarship. Vanessa paid Imani back, in full, in her own time, and the check cleared and the sisters cried, and then they went out for pupusas on 4th Avenue and did not speak of it again. Marcus Voss is still in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. He has written Imani 2 letters. She has not opened either of them. She keeps them in a drawer, unopened, because she has learned that some doors do not have to be walked through to be closed. If you have made it this far, if you have felt in your chest even one moment of what Imani felt, do me one small favor. Drop a comment below and tell me the year, the month, the exact moment you stopped being who you used to be. Just the timestamp. That's all. Share this video with the woman in your life who is still standing in the snow, because she needs to know the car is coming. Subscribe if you haven't, because we tell these stories every week, and you deserve to hear them. She didn't get a fairy tale ending. She got something better. She got herself back. And on the other side of getting herself back, she found a man who had been waiting, patiently and honestly, and without a single strings-attached rescue, for her to arrive as a full person. That's not a rescue story. That's the other kind. The kind where the woman walks in on her own 2 feet and stays because she wants to, not because she has to. That's the ending worth waiting for. That's the ending you deserve too.